All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast. My name is Rick Butler, joined with Ryan Shumpert. Today is Thursday, February 13th. As we record this, a little bit of a double dose of the RTI Press Pass podcast coming at you, as yesterday we released our Tennessee baseball opening series preview that Ryan and Jack were on. So there's a lot of podcasting coming at you right now, a lot going on in the Tennessee sports world. Let's welcome in Ryan. My man, how are you doing? It's been a long time since we talked. We did not get to go to the Tuesday game together, so it's been a minute since I've seen you. How are you doing today? What's going on?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's been a minute since we talked over camera because we weren't able to do a post game video on Tuesday, and then we missed out on the podcast last week for basketball. So doing well. Think I've had a little bit better week than you. You've been battling some illness, so glad to see you back up on your feet and at least feeling a little bit better. So all's been well. Hope you're getting back close to 100%.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It has been one of those weeks. You know, I saw it over the weekend, and it was that video of Colin Cowherd. You might have seen it. I guess maybe his show on Friday. He just left abruptly for it. It
Yeah,
looked like he just got hit with something out of nowhere, and that's kind of how it hit me over the weekend as well. I was sitting there, I was watching the Lady Vols on Sunday evening, and then all of a sudden, you know, kind of before the Super Bowl, all of a sudden, just felt like I got hit with a Roy Nelson right hook. And for the UFC fans in the crowd. You know that's a devastating one. So fortunately, it started to go away. My voice might not fully be there yet. My brain still might be a little bit foggy, but we knew we had to bring to you a little bit of Tennessee basketball conversation as Tennessee moves in to a home game against Vanderbilt this weekend in Knoxville. Tennessee, to this point in the season, 20-5 record. Obviously, we know that they lost to Kentucky and Lexington last Tuesday night after a 3-game win streak that included wins over Florida, Missouri, and Oklahoma, the last one being on the road. So again, 6 games left in the regular season. You got 3 in the month of February, 3 in the month of March as we move into Vanderbilt this weekend. But Ryan, you're right. We did not get to talk after the game in Lexington, as one of us was there, one of us was not. Obviously, I was the one who was not. But I want to go back to that game real quick, just because it was Tennessee's first game first loss in about 2 weeks, a little less than that. Just sort of, what did you take away from that game? What went wrong for Tennessee during that game, and what do you think they're going to be? What do you think they're going to be trying to build upon as they get into the Vanderbilt game this weekend?
yeah. It was, I mean, their first loss since they lost to Kentucky. Essentially 2 weeks before that. That first Kentucky game might have been on a Wednesday. I can't remember if it was a Wednesday or Tuesday, but 2 midweeks prior for sure. So, yeah, I think the frustration, as you look at the game as a whole, is Kentucky seemingly can't stop a nosebleed right now, except for when they play Tennessee. And Tennessee's had 2 bad offensive performances, or at least not great offensive performances. The second half was a lot better on this Tuesday night in the game in Rupp. But then Tennessee struggled again. The final 5 minutes is what I think it was a 17-4 run for Kentucky in the final 4.5 minutes of that game, or something to that extent. So I think that's where some frustration is for Tennessee, especially given, the Florida game, the offense wasn't great, but, they were down Guy Ziegler, they were down Igor Milicic. You didn't really expect it to be. In the 2 games last week, the win over Missouri and the win over Oklahoma, Tennessee's offense was a lot better. But I think that's just kind of what you're seeing with Tennessee's offense right now. It feels like it's a lot of hit or miss. 3 straight games, really, where they've had one half that they've been really good, or good to really good against Oklahoma and Missouri, and I'd say good in the second half offensively against Kentucky. And then in all 3 of those games, one half where they weren't very good. First half against Missouri, first half against Kentucky. It was the second half against Oklahoma. Tennessee was up by so much. You didn't really know how much to – it didn't feel like it mattered nearly as much. It didn't matter nearly as much. But I think offensive consistency in Tennessee, trying to find some answers there, continues to be, a long-term question for a team that I think is just going to be plagued with offensive inconsistency because they're not great on that end of the court.
Yeah, and I think that was the big noticeable thing that you saw in the Kentucky game, just kind of stretches and waves, and especially when you go back and compare it to the Oklahoma game as well. Like you said, just inconsistency. And I think that does travel down to or trickle down to some of Tennessee's players as well. You look at Chaz Neer and Igor Milicic Jr., 2 of Tennessee's leading 3 scorers, I believe, in terms of points per game. But when you go back and look at the stats, 5 out of Lanier's last 11 SEC games, he's only recorded 10 points. And then Igor Milicic Jr., who put together a phenomenal second half in Lexington just on Tuesday night, his last 6 SEC games, 16, 8, 21, 19, 4, and 3. So when you're talking about an inconsistent Tennessee offense just as whole, just as a whole, excuse me, it's kind of replicating the players as well, or at least you can see where that's feeding in.
For sure. I do feel like Milicic has been better as of late. I don't know if I'd go
Yeah.
as far to say it turned a corner, but I mean, you said it the last 6 games, you take out the 4 and 3 against Mississippi State, where I think that inconsistency, you really felt it. The last 4, he's got, like you said, 19, 21, 8 and 16, 8 and 16.
Yeah.
The 8 points, he was 3 of 5 shooting. You'd like to see him be a little bit more assertive. But he's also been what he's been doing. I think he's been doing really efficiently. He has not taken more than 10 shots in any of those 4 games. So, I like what Milicic has given Tennessee offensively. He's shooting the ball really well as of late. I feel like he's doing a little bit more to get to the rim. But Lanier for sure, and Jordan Gainey too. Like
Yeah.
Tennessee players not named Igor Milicic combined to shoot. Trying to find a number here. 0 of 14 from 3 the other night at Kentucky, and Sakai only took 2 of them. He was really putting a lot of emphasis on getting to the rim. But 0 of 4 for Gainey, including some open ones late in the game. 0 for 7 for Chaz Lanier. Like those are the ones that Tennessee needs more from those guys. Tennessee's not going to win many games against quality opponents, especially on the road, when those 2 guys can combine to shoot 0 of 11 from 3.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And again, that's kind of the tricky thing with Tennessee right now is you just don't exactly know what you're going to expect. I mean, you
Yeah,
look at after that 3-game win streak, and you had some people here, whether it was locally, maybe some people nationally, just saying, hey, maybe this Tennessee team really is what it can be, or maybe it really is sort of representative of this top 8 ranking that they've had all year. Maybe they really are one of those top 8 contenders. Then you see after the loss Kentucky, and people sort of free fall back down to, I don't know if Tennessee is a Sweet 16 team. I don't know if Tennessee is an Elite 8 team. And obviously that's the media, right? They're always going to ride these highs and lows and sort of overreact to it. So that's not necessarily the point I'm trying to make, but it just goes to that showing of, man, with Tennessee, we've seen the highs, we've seen the lows. You just don't exactly know what you're going to get on a week-to-week basis, or really a game-to-game basis. You could have a game like the first half against Oklahoma, the second half against Mississippi State, or Missouri, the first half against Florida. What was it? I believe that was that back-to-back stretch where Tennessee's offense looked unstoppable. They just looked in rhythm and in sync, and they looked quick, but they also looked like they knew what they were doing and they were in control of things. Then you get to other times and things just look a little bit lost or muddy out there. So it's just these inconsistencies that have plagued Tennessee a bit this season as we get to this point where there's only 6 games remaining left. Is that kind of what you see as well? Just sort of you don't know what you're going to get from game to game?
I think so. And look, I think we've talked about it some. I've written about it
And
some.
wait, I want to say, well, and that's also not to say like, man, Tennessee, might lose to, we know that this team, we say that in the relative standards of where this team is, right? Inconsistent for being one of the top 10, being one of the top 15 programs in the country. So not to just say that, up and down can range as far as the eye can see, up and down in terms of, where their competition, where their, where the sort of context is set at.
For sure, to your point, comparing them to those top other SEC teams and Florida, Auburn, and Alabama, the 3 other teams that have
Right.
been in the 1 seed conversation. Those teams have all been better in SEC play. What Tennessee's 6-4, I believe now in conference play, maybe 7-5. So I'm missing 2 games there. They're 7-5. Florida's 8-3, and Auburn and Alabama are 10-1. So yeah, from that standard for sure. And I think that's where now Tennessee's lost 3 games on the road where, they were right in it at the end. The Auburn, or to go back to the Vanderbilt game, Chaz Lanier misses a free throw that would have forced overtime in the last, whatever it was, 5 seconds of the game, I think. The Auburn game, Tennessee was up 4 or 5 at the foul line with less than 2 minutes left, and they lost. And then again, the Kentucky game, Tennessee was up by 2 with less than 5 minutes left, down by 1 at the under 4 timeout, and then really in the Kentucky game laid an egg down the stretch. So I think that's where the frustration particularly is. Tennessee wins just one of those games, or doesn't lay an egg in the first game against Kentucky. I think Tennessee is sitting here at 8-4. You probably feel a lot better about where they're at, and given what they did in non-conference play, they'd be sitting in a pretty good spot in that 1 seed conversation too. So, yeah, I think all that Oh, that's completely accurate. And I guess the point I was going to make a minute ago is, it's just the offensive stuff. It's a team that does not score very well at the rim, does not have an interior presence offensively, whether really that's a guard or a big man that they can throw the ball down to and can score some contested baskets. So because of that, they're dependent on jump shooting, and and typically that's going to lend to some inconsistencies, but all the more so when the way Chaz Lanier and Jordan Gainey have struggled to shoot the ball for SEC play. And same thing for Zakai Ziegler really before the last handful of games as well. Though
Yeah,
Ziegler isn't quite as far off from the norm of what you'd expect. I think he's shooting like 29% in SEC play from three. You'd obviously want to see him be better, but he's a career 32, 33% shooter. You don't expect him to shoot 40%, whereas Lanier was whatever he was, 44% entering SEC play, maybe even a little bit higher than that. And he's been shooting about 32% in SEC play. And Jordan Gainey shot 37, 38% in non-conference play, and he's shooting about 28% in SEC play. So those are the two guys I would outline more of the inconsistency shooting. And when you don't have a bunch of consistent interior scoring and you're inconsistent shooting, that's a whole lot of inconsistency, and you're seeing that play out for Tennessee offensively right now.
yeah, absolutely, and we'll see how that continues. Again, Tennessee's got a home game against Vanderbilt coming up this weekend. Then you go on back-to-back road games to close out the month of February. Tennessee's got a top 8 matchup in College Station coming up next Saturday. So there's actually going to be a bye week between those Saturday games. Little bit of a break for us in the middle of the week, as well as the fans. And then you close the month with a road contest at LSU that following Tuesday. So certainly a lot on tap for Tennessee, but they do have that bye week under the Vanderbilt game. I think this is probably a pretty good spot for them. It's not necessarily anything that Tennessee has been dealing with health concerns or anything like that. But when you look at the last 6 games of the season, you get that 5th one out of the way before the bye week. But just a good time that Tennessee is going to need to kind of reset, refocus, get ready, and figure out what they can do to maybe try to improve some of these difficulties that they've had or whatever. But moving into that final stretch of 5 games in the season, because as you talked about a minute ago, that SEC tournament race is heating up, and it's certainly been hot all season. So Tennessee's going to need to make some strides here with these last 6 games on the schedule.
Definitely. It's very late. I don't know this for sure. My guess is this would be that would be next week would be the last week of midweek buys. Like this week, there were no midweek buys. Um,
Right.
so maybe
It was a
there's one
pack.
more
It was a
week, but it's
packed
about
slate
as
on
late.
Tuesday.
Say that again.
It was a packed slate on Tuesday. I know you
It
were at
was.
the game in Lexington, but boy, did we have some good some good games to kind of flip the channels through on Tuesday.
Yeah, there were. It was a loaded slate on Tuesday. But when you just look at Tennessee's, look, they don't play a ton of guys. The rotation's really small. The grind of SEC play, it's as good as any conference this year. So I think when you look at it kind of through that lens, just an open date, a little bit of time off will be really good for Tennessee. And I think when you look at Tennessee's final 5 games of the schedule, I think Tennessee should beat Vanderbilt at home, should get some revenge on Saturday. And then when you look at Tennessee's 5 games, I think it's a very fair goal to set out for Tennessee that they would go 4-1 in those 5 games. When 2 hard road games at Texas A&M and Ole Miss, try to split one of those and then take care of business at home against Alabama, which obviously it's certainly not going to be easy. A very good Alabama team, that is a win at home on Saturday night away from being the number 1 team in the country. And then you play the 2 worst teams in the SEC at LSU and at South Carolina, or at home against South Carolina. Those other 2 matchups, and I didn't say those games in the order, but just kind of layering
Yeah.
those things. So
Yeah.
you take care of the 2 worst teams in the conference. You beat Alabama at home. You split, 2 hard road games that aren't going to be easy, but are winnable against Texas A&M and Ole Miss. Then I think you're going to be able to get to, what that would put Tennessee at 12-6 in SEC play. I think that would put them in a decent spot to be a 4 or 5 seed, potentially getting that double bye in Nashville for the SEC tournament. And I doubt would be enough to be a number 1 overall seed, but it is probably, I think for sure would be enough to be a number 2 seed. So you do that, you would win 5 of your final 6 games in the regular season. It would be 8 of your final 10 games in the regular season. I think everybody would probably be feeling pretty good about where this basketball team's at heading into postseason play.
Yeah, Tennessee right now, 7th in the SEC standings, a 7-5 conference record. But again, we talked about that game against Texas A&M coming up not this Saturday, but next. We talked about that Alabama matchup in Knoxville on March 1st. That is certainly going to bring down the house at the Food City Center. So opportunities for Tennessee coming up on the horizon as tournament play and everything else like that sort of lies out in the distance. Right. What are the keys for Tennessee just as they move into these final stretches? What's maybe something that, hey, you're I don't want to say you're looking for, but just maybe something that you think they're talking about during the bye week, or just where you see maybe this Tennessee team needing to tweak something in those lines to try to move the needle as they push into this final part of the schedule.
I think there's a number of ways you can go with this, and there's not just one glaring issue to me. But just to hit on a couple, I think turnovers is kind of off and on plagued this team. Look, they turned the ball over 9 times at Kentucky the other night, which isn't a ton on the surface, but Kentucky's a terrible team at forcing turnovers. They do not do that well. Tennessee, I thought, had some big turnovers in big spots. I thought the biggest sequence of the game, really a 3 possession sequence. Zakai Ziegler Tennessee had that possession. I imagine you probably remember where they got 3 offensive rebounds in the same possession. Zakai Ziegler made a tough reverse layup to take the lead. Kobe Brea hit like a 27-footer with Jemiah Mashak in his face. And then Zakai turned the ball over, threw the ball out of bounds, going into the under 4 timeouts. Tennessee was down by 1, and then Kentucky got an animal and added the under 4 timeout. And that felt like a really costly turnover for Tennessee. And they got off to a slow start. They turned it over 3 times by the first media timeout of the game the other night. So that would be a big one. I'm skeptical of how much they're going to be able to clean it up, just because it's kind of been an off and on problem for them all year. And then I think, the big thing besides that is just kind of what we're talking about, specific players, knowing what you're going to get out of them. And I think Igor Milicic is the big one that I would highlight. Is if he continues his current, last 4-game stretch where he's been playing really well, I like what Tennessee has offensively, because I think he has a little bit of a different ability to score at the glass that some other guys like Chaz Lanier doesn't have. So he feels like a big X factor to me when he's hitting shots, the way that can space the defense with him as the 4-man. I think is really important. So you want to see that from whoever you can get it from. But I think Milicic in particular is a guy that changes the dynamic for Tennessee offensively when he is on.
Yeah, and you just mentioned a second ago, it's certainly the spacing that he creates. But when you see him being able to find his shot, when you see him being able to use a little bit of that confidence and honestly use a little bit of just maybe a let it fly mentality. And again, to your point from earlier in the podcast, not that he's just letting it fly 20 times per game, but when he's got his shot, even if there's a little bit of pressure, he can go ahead and take it. It really helps Tennessee with just the versatility that they can do, the ability to change how the defense has to view him, has to guard him. Obviously, Kentucky was guarding him a little bit differently in the second half when he was making all those shots, as opposed to in the first half when he had those 3 points. So I agree with you. Look, we know what Zakai Ziegler does to this team at the point guard spot. He leads the charge. He's the team captain. He's the quarterback. He's facilitating a lot of things. And we know that Chaz Lanier is a very good shooter, but a very streaky shooter as well. We know that he can have a lot of hot and cold games. I think that Lanier is your X factor. And you could make the case for maybe a Felix Okpara and just, how good he's been in SEC play, where that's been beneficial to Tennessee. And I wouldn't necessarily argue you there. But again, we've just talked about the different things that Milicic can do on the court. The ability to get bunches of points in a pretty quick stretch has also been impressive, whether it's being able to knock down a 3 and then drive to the basket and maybe even get an and one opportunity. I really like just, again, his ability to kind of score in bunches for Tennessee. And look, on a team that sort of lacks scoring from time to time, that's a valuable thing to have. So I like everything you say there. And I do think that, whether you're talking about Okpara, whether you're talking about Milicic, Tennessee's got a couple of these X factors that could really help them out down the stretch. But we also kind of have an idea about what the identity of this team looks like and what they're going to do for Tennessee in these last 6 games. To me, it's about capitalizing on that. To me, it's about tweaking where you can, like you mentioned a second ago, with some of the turnovers, some of those things. But it's about trying to figure out, hey, what have your strengths been this season? How can you capitalize on that? And then how can you kind of bury some of those deficiencies as well? And we'll see how Tennessee's coaching staff attacks that here with the next game against Vanderbilt. And then obviously a little bit of time to breathe before that next road game against Texas A&M.
You're right that Lanier probably is, I guess, the X factor more so just because it just changes the dynamics so much when he's hitting shots. Um, I just I just think there's a level of built-in inconsistency with him just because of how little he does offensively, besides shoot the ball. But no, you're right, and I think seeing the floor raise a bit for him would go a long way. A bad shooting performance, a bad offensive performance being 2 of 8 or something from 3 instead of 0 of 7, I think would go a long way to just giving Tennessee a little bit more offensive consistency.
Sure, and I will say this: my brain is about as foggy as a cold January day on the Tennessee River. So I might have said Lanier. I was meaning Milicic that whole time. Again, I'm sure you've noticed it. I'm sure the people have noticed it. My thoughts are my thoughts are not developing as quickly as I would like them to for this podcast. So some of the words are getting twisted around a little bit, but I did mean Milicic for that X factor.
Gotcha.
Just being, we know that Ziegler is the floor general. We know that Lanier is a shooter, though streaky. And so I think you can make the case for Akbar, certainly. But my argument would be for just Igor Milicic with his ability to
Gotcha.
score on different levels of the court.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah,
is as
no.
foggy as a cold day on the Tennessee River right now. You know those days where you just can't hardly see anything in front of you?
Yeah.
That's kind of what's working behind the eyeballs here today. I hope it's not been too bad.
No, it hasn't been. I think the last thing I would say, and look, this is maybe unfair or maybe sounds dumb given how good Tennessee has been defensively again this year, but I just would like to see them be more crisp and more locked into scouting reports. I mean, I thought they had a number of defensive breakdowns in the final 5 minutes of the Kentucky game. I thought Cade Phillips talked about it after the game, or I was asking him about it, that there's, they still have some scouting report issues or scouting report breakdowns at times, and that just, that can't happen. I think that's where I think teams like Kentucky, Missouri's the same way, Vanderbilt to a little bit of a lesser degree. I think their offensive styles give Tennessee more issues when it's so much movement and really not one lead scorer. They have a bunch of different guys that can shoot the ball and a bunch of different guys that score. Because I think that more than anything, Tennessee's obviously very aggressive in the gaps team, trying to get steals, and I think that style can at times make you pay a little bit for over aggression, and more than anything, I think it just makes all 5 players be locked in. It tests all 5 players defensively. Whereas when Tennessee plays a team like Alabama, who's very ball dominant in how they play, it's a lot of spacing and then drive and kick. Or, Oklahoma's the perfect example. Oklahoma had like 2 guys that could score on their team. When you have 2 guys that score and you are forced to play through them and play with less movement, I think Tennessee's just got a couple elite defenders that can really do a good job of shutting guys down that way. So, in that way, I think Kentucky was kind of a bad matchup for Tennessee. I think Missouri was that way. Vanderbilt is a little bit less of the movement aspect, and they do have a couple guys that are lead scorers, but they still have shooters on the outside, and it's not like it's just one player that's really, really ball dominant for their team. So that that was a challenge. I think that was probably Tennessee's worst defensive game of the year. Was the first game in Memorial, and they need to get things back on track this Saturday at home against a team that gave them a lot of issues just a month ago.
Speaking of that game in Memorial just about a month ago, that was a game where Tennessee and Vanderbilt went they went back and forth in the first half of play. Vanderbilt led for a little bit at the beginning. Tennessee took over. Vanderbilt took over before halftime, and then Vanderbilt never gave up the lead through the second half of play. Just I know you mentioned this a little bit there, but what exactly does Tennessee need to do to sort of change the tides? We know that game came down to a last-second free throw miss by Chaz Lanier, but that loss was also earned, in plenty of other moments before that. You talked about the defensive breakdowns. Is it, and this Vanderbilt team, man, is hungry. They can upset some people. They played Auburn pretty darn well last week in, I can't remember
Nashville.
I think in Nashville.
On Tuesday night. Yeah, so I think it was the
on
same
Tuesday
time as
night,
the Kentucky
Nashville.
game.
It was, and I know Auburn jumped out to a huge game in that game, but the Commodores were able to fight back a little bit. Just sort of what's on your radar? I think this is going to be one of the things you write about maybe a little bit later in the week, but three things to look for when Tennessee takes on Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I need to dive into it a little bit more. Maybe some of the recent trends, but just going back to the first game, um, I say this a little tongue in cheek, but don't bench Zakai Ziegler for 7.5 minutes with two fouls in the first half would probably go a long way.
That's right.
But yeah, I think it's the defensive breakdowns. I think Tennessee got beat off the dribble a lot in that game. They seemed to me to have some bad communication on ball screen defense at multiple times where they were not on the same page. I think they just need to be crisper, and I think that goes back to my last point. I think that was the game where it probably showed up the most this season. So I think there's that aspect. I'd like to see Tennessee. I think the rebounding was very, very even in that first meeting. I'd like to see Tennessee break even or do more than break even in rebounding. Vanderbilt's not a bad rebounding team, but they are a smaller team as a whole. I'd like to see Tennessee just have a little bit more aggression and success there in this game. So I think those are a handful of things. And then again, I would say Igor Milicic had a big first game against Vanderbilt. I think he's a little bit of a matchup issue for the Commodores. I'd like to see him both for this game and just the context of the way we've been talking. I'd like to see him have another big game, another 15+ point game to go or along with 7 or 8 rebounds.
Yeah, no doubt about it. See if he can kind of capitalize on that momentum. Momentum is a thing that I think Tennessee could really use right now. When you're talking about Igor Milicic's last 3 or 4 games, 3 of those above 16 points, one of them getting all the way up to 21 points. Man, that's a dynamic scoring option right now for Tennessee that they've got to continue to figure out how to capitalize on and see if they can get a little bit of a repeat performance. Again, that game is going to be Saturday afternoon in Knoxville at the Food City Center, I believe at 1 o'clock p.m. I think it is. Yes, at 1 o'clock p.m. on the SEC Network if you are watching from home. Ryan, I know we're going to get into a little bit more basketball conversation next week. Even though there was a bye week, there is no break for us. I want to get back into a little bit of a deeper dive, just in sort of kind of some of the conversation that we've been talking about now, but expanding it out a little bit more. To tell you the truth, once I have some of my thoughts back solidified down in my brain a little bit, any other kind of final thoughts, just as we sort of talk about this Tennessee basketball team again, 20-5 at this point in the season, moving into the final 6 games of the regular season, starting with the game against Vanderbilt this Saturday afternoon in Knoxville.
No, I think we've hit on all the big ones. I think it's just kind of what I got to a little bit a little while ago, but I think the schedule sets up for Tennessee to have a pretty strong close. So it starts with having to take care of business against Vanderbilt on Saturday, get some revenge. And if Tennessee does that, I think this is a team that could use a couple days off, could use some rest given the lack of depth, and then you can see them potentially make a run in this final stretch. So I think that's what I'll be interested to see. I know probably right now there's a good bit of frustration and maybe lackadaisical following of this team, or maybe lackadaisical is not the right word, but not a ton of people super excited about it. I think there's a potential to believe this team could close strong to end the regular season and find themselves in a pretty good spot.
There is a lot going on Rocky Top this week. Not only the game coming up on Saturday afternoon in the Food City Center, but also Tennessee baseball opens up their season with a 3-game series against Hofstra over at Lindsey Nelson Stadium. The defending national champions take the field for the first time in regular season play since, that win in Omaha in the College World Series. Ryan and Jack put out 2 really good podcasts that you should go ahead and listen to, whether it's on the podcast or on the YouTube. Number 1 was a season preview podcast just about a week or so ago. That one is a really long, good, in-depth look into this Tennessee baseball roster, some of the storylines, just what you need to know heading into the season as a whole. But then also on, on Thursday morning, they also dropped another one that was specifically previewing some of the recent storylines going on around Tennessee baseball right now, but a really good preview into just this opening weekend that Tennessee baseball is going to have coming up in Lindsey Nelson Stadium. So, Ryan, 2 really good shows by you guys there. Highly recommend everybody going to check those out before the baseball season gets started. But even if you miss it, even if you don't get around to it till Sunday afternoon or whatever, make sure to add those to your to-do list before the baseball season really starts cranking out. Ryan and I will both be at the basketball game on Saturday, so we will have post-game coverage of that final, whatever it be, whoever it goes to. And then Ryan and Jack will also have full weekend baseball coverage as well. So 4 games on Rocky Top this weekend. Ryan, you ready?
Ready as I'm gonna be, I guess. Should be enough to keep us plenty busy, and will be good to get a first look at this Tennessee baseball team, and even if it's against a Hofstra team that's not too good, maybe they'll go. Maybe Hofstra will get Darlingstone Dubar to come over and do a doubleheader on Saturday and play, maybe pitch a couple innings out of the bullpen for him.
You took my joke, but that's why you're so smart. You're a smart guy that connected the dots before I even got there. That's why we pay you the big bucks. He is Ryan Shumpert on Twitter. You can follow him at rshump00. I am a very sick Rick Butler. Going to go take some medicine here in a bit, but you can follow me at Rick_Butler as well. Again, I want to talk about next week real quick because while Tennessee basketball is on a break, Ryan, I do want to come back to the press pass with you. Want to expand on some of our basketball conversation here, maybe hit on some of the football storylines that have been going on as well, because we haven't talked football this week. So want to come back with a big return episode next week. So be on the lookout for that, maybe next Wednesday or so, maybe even as early as Tuesday, depending on how things go. But otherwise, make sure you're subscribed to the RTI Press Pass so you don't miss anything. Make sure you are checking out RockyTopInsider.com each and every day so you don't miss any Tennessee news, notes, and coverage. And follow us on social media wherever you are found. We are there as well. Hey, that's Ryan. I'm Rick. Thanks for listening to the RTI Press Pass podcast today. Stay healthy out there. We'll see you back for the next one Saturday.